Hello and welcome to the video on valuation modeling. The first question to ask is, how can you increase your valuation if you don't start tracking it? The starting point of any exit strategy is creating an exit strategy valuation model and tracking it over time. And then we're also going to walk through, how do you think about an actual deal structure so that you know not only what your overall top line valuation is, but how the actual deal will be structured to see if it meets your needs. Let's get started. First thing we'll cover, valuation modeling belongs at the center of your exit strategy planning. The second thing we'll cover is we'll talk about how do you track your valuation over time, and then we'll walk through the structure of a deal. Okay, we've used this pyramid for you to help understand kind of how to think about valuation modeling as it relates to the other strategic finance functions. We started at the base, compliance and risk management. First rule, do no harm. Then we moved to historical accounting. Then we moved to future forecasting and budgeting. Then we looked at the cash needs that you're going to have in order to achieve that forecast. We talked then about creating a range of outcomes for your business. And now we've reached the top of the mountain talking about what does it all mean from a valuation perspective. But here's the way that it should actually be organized in my mind. Your compliance is still at the bottom. That's still your base. Your accounting, your forecasting, your cash flow, and your scenario modeling, they actually all exist to center around your valuation model, because the heart of any exit strategy is actually the value in the deal that you get. So let's start thinking of those other functions as a support function for good valuation modeling. Okay. Valuation modeling is not that complicated now that we've done the work. It's simply extending your forecast and your scenarios to include valuation at its core. The first thing that you do is you take your forecast and you apply a multiple to it. And oftentimes people always ask me about the multiple, and it's obviously different for every business. I always just say start really conservative. Put a 2 in there or a 3 in there, something. And then as you learn more about the exit strategy process in your business and you start to understand what drives valuation a little bit further, then you can start to change what the number is over time. Then start to look at a multiple in each one of your scenarios. My worst case, my best case, and my base case. How do I start to think now in terms of valuation as a range? And then finally, make sure that you're tracking your valuation each month as you go through your monthly financial reporting process. Here's an example of a base case forecast. And as you can see down at the bottom, we've just gotten even more conservative and said, okay, we're going to be saying we're worth a 2x multiple for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. And if we grow at 20% from where we are now, what's going to happen to the business as we grow over time? Very simple to put it in, but it gives you a very good top-down view of the business. Okay, the action item first is to start creating, and as you can see, we have a chart and a graph to be able to help you do this, is to go in and be able to assess your valuation monthly, take a look at it initially based on your trailing 12 months discretionary earnings or EBITDA, and then take a look on each one of your scenarios. What happens to that valuation over time as you start to grow faster, and start to analyze what value you have in your company in the next 90 days, 6 months, 1 year, and 2 or 3 years based on both your forecast and your scenario analysis. And then finally, start to look at that valuation tracking as a part of your monthly process. So each month when your accounting books close, you're no longer just going to look at your income statement. You're going to look at your 3 financial statements. You're then going to look at your forecast. You're going to look at your scenarios, and you're going to look at your valuation, and you're going to update those along with your cash flow. It might take a little longer, but believe me, if you start doing this on a regular basis, you will start to see new things in how to optimize the valuation of your company. Okay, we now have an overall valuation for the company, but what does that actually mean in terms of a deal? And as I like to say, you can't negotiate a premium deal if you don't understand how deals are structured. Let's walk through first the 3 levels of understanding of deal structuring. The first thing is you just got to get your hands around the language of the deal itself. Then you understand the relationship between how those different deals are structured. And finally, you then relate that to a valuation analysis across multiple buyers and multiple scenarios. In this video, we're just going to focus on the structure of the deal and not talk about the comparative analysis. So let's get started with that. You have to understand some basic components in terms of a deal. So we'll start out with your earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, which is called EBITDA. And if you add owner add backs into it, if you're doing a SDE based deal, it's called seller's discretionary earnings. In this example, we've got 2 million. And then you apply a multiple, but as you're going to find out, there's actually multiple multiples in your business. And so this is referred to oftentimes as the enterprise value multiple or enterprise valuation. You take the 2 million times the 5 and you get the enterprise value of your company, which is $10 million. Okay. Then there's a deal component called rolled equity or retained equity. This is essentially the percentage of your company that you're deciding not to sell today, but to sell in the future. And rolled equity, as you can see in this example, is 20%. So you actually subtract that 20% you're not selling, or a 1x multiple. And there's something now called your base purchase price. Your purchase price is equal to your enterprise value minus the percentage that you didn't sell. Or another way to say it is that the buyer is buying 80% of this business for $8 million rather than buying 100% of it for $10 million. And as a disclaimer, we're just using a 5x multiple here so we can do easy math. I'm not guaranteeing that any business out there can get 5x or 2x or 6x, but the important point is understanding the relationship between these different types of things. So we now have our base purchase price. How do we break down the base purchase price? First, you have to look at it in what are called non-contingent payments. The primary non-contingent payment is cash at close. And as you can see in this example, what we're saying is that we're doing a 5x cash at close. We've got a holdback, which is money that is sometimes held back for particular claims that might happen in the business. We also have something called seller financing. Seller financing is non-contingent because it's not based on whether the business performs, but it's essentially you extending a loan to the buyer so that they can help cash flow the acquisition. Then we get into what are called contingent payments, and there's two types of them, generally referred to as earnouts. There's a stabilization payment, which is basically stay stable or at least 90% of where you're at today. And then there are increasing earnout payments that happen as you grow at different levels. You factor those in, and now we have a breakdown of the $8 million into various component sections of the deal. And this is just an illustration. It's likely that not every deal has every component, but we want you to be able to understand them. Next, we have to look at what are referred to as balance sheet adjustments. And as we've talked about in the previous cash flow management video, you have to add your cash and deduct your debts. But then you also add in your inventory, which usually gets added on top, and you subtract the payables. If you're doing, again, a net working capital peg deal, this might not be in there. But if you're separating it out, you then add in your current assets like accounts receivable, you subtract your current liabilities. And then in this particular example, we have a net balance sheet adjustment of $400,000. This is critical to understand because different deals are going to be factored in differently. So you have to make sure that you're thinking of the deal in the right context in order to compare apples to apples. So your net purchase price at close would be $8.4 million or a 4.2 multiple on the $2 million of earnings. And you add in the rolled equity to add it back in. The total enterprise value of this deal, including the balance sheet, is $10.4 million or a 5.2 multiple. The one thing we didn't add in is a transition contract because most people like to think of the fact that if I'm going to work for 2 or 3 years with a buyer and get paid, that shouldn't be factored into my sale. Although I put it here because it certainly can help you get a higher multiple if you're willing to stay on with a buyer to reduce their risk and make sure the business runs well after the exit. Okay, the action item is, now that you understand the deal structure, is to try and do it yourself. We've provided a deal structure worksheet in the workbook so that you can plug in numbers for your company and start to allocate out a sample deal that you might have. We've come to the end of the strategic finance set of videos, and I'd like to have one final thought. Strategic finance is really laying the foundation for you, not just to run your business better, but it's also critical to negotiating a premium valuation. You have to prepare in advance and make sure that you understand the range of outcomes and how to grow your business successfully in order to get the top dollar value for it. Or as I like to say, you now have the knowledge to set the ladder up against the right wall. Don't be afraid to start climbing it. So, valuation modeling is the last step in financial processes of strategic finance. It's the last part of implementing something that's going to help you combine your historical accounting numbers, your go forward future, your valuation number overall, and then finally the deal structure of how you're actually going to get paid. Thanks a lot for watching and diving in. I recognize that strategic finance is a deep and sometimes difficult topic. So once again, don't feel like you have to implement it and learn it all in one day or week. But over the course of the next coming months and maybe even years for some of you that are starting out, having a handle on your numbers and knowing your numbers will be one of the biggest keys to maximizing the value when you exit. Thank you.